everybody. This is Angie Callen, your host of No More Mondays podcast. Good start to the week. I hope you're all doing well out there. Combated those Sunday scaries yesterday and are ready for a great conversation to help you live and work more authentically. They say everything in life is a negotiation, whether you're closing a deal, asking for a raise, convincing a toddler to eat a piece of broccoli. And if you've ever read Never Split the Difference, you might think negotiations is all about psychological warfare. But is it really? Today, I am diving into a new topic for the podcast, and that is the reality of negotiations. Not just the big ones that are in the boardroom or asking for more money, but the everyday ones that shape our careers, our relationships, our self-worth, or even the activities that we do. And I have got just the expert to help us unpack it all. Susie Tomenchok is a powerhouse in negotiations coaching, where she helps professionals and executives get more comfortable with these tough conversations and teaches them how to leverage negotiation skills for success without feeling like we have to play hardball. I love her approach to communications because, spoiler alert, that's what negotiating is. And so let's get this conversation started. Susie, welcome to No More Mondays.
Yay. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I love this. So for everybody out there, a little backstory. Susie and I actually met IRL at a conference this past summer. Not The Thing, by the way. I actually do go to other events. If you've been listening recently, I've had a string of guests who came from The Thing. But earlier this summer, Susie and I were both speakers at a pretty big conference. And it was funny because as we were each on stage, we kept like, oh yeah, wait, that sounds like me. That sounds like you. And it was like this ping, ping, ping. And here she is living in Denver. And it was like, we need to have our worlds collide. And so here we are.
Love it. And we both come from the school of thought of abundance, and there's enough room for everybody at the table, which I just love that. So I'm so happy that we connected. We were supposed to meet.
We totally were. And also this conversation is reversed on Susie's podcast, which she'll tell you about before we go. So there you go. There's a couple aspects of all of this. And I love what you said, Susie, about this idea of abundance, and there is enough for everyone, because I completely believe that collaboration is better than competition. And in a way, that kind of relates to this topic of negotiation. And so I want to start with like a fact and fiction situation here.
Okay.
How true is this notion really that everything is a negotiation? Is there truth to that matter? Is that just like an overused phrase at this point in society?
It's so funny because I just had a friend today remind me that after she got to know me and we had these conversations, she goes, I always knew that negotiation was in my everyday, but it is like really in our everyday conversations. And I get really energized and passionate about that idea because it is about communication. It's about connection. It's about trust. And really, negotiation was first taught in law school in the 70s. And that was about the win-lose. That's where win-lose came from. And then through the 80s, business schools started adopting the strategies around negotiation. And now when you look at everything that's written on it, it's all around EQ and how to connect. And it's about the relationship. And it really is truly something that you need to work out with somebody else. Because listen, we all have a different position. We all see the world through a different orientation. And so just given that reality, every discussion is a negotiation.
I think that's such an important, and I feel like let's stop making the word negotiation a dirty word.
Totally.
Thank you, win-loss of the 70s, which we're gonna talk about, because I think if you can shed that mentality, it really does become a discussion with the attempts to find common ground.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And I've interviewed men and women who negotiate for a living and that don't negotiate for a living, but they're executives. And I found it fascinating. And this is my own research, so it's not like I'm going to give you the exact stat, but a lot of the men would say, oh, I negotiate all the time with my boss, where the women would look at it and go, yeah, that's this situation. It's like this laminated list that people believe. And I think that we should use that word more liberally, because if I say to you, if you and I are colleagues in a corporation, Angie, and I say, hey, Angie, you know what? Let's sit down and let's negotiate our priorities. When you think about that, what I'm saying is I'm interested in understanding what your priorities are and how can we blend those together. It's a powerful word.
It's such a mindset shift around this idea that immediately my mom listens to every one of these podcasts. So mom, I'm going to
Hi,
talk about
Mom.
dad for a second. When I think about negotiations, I think about the off the charts level of my dad's blood pressure anytime we needed to go buy a new car when we were a kid.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we think
Yeah.
about. And so when you sit down and say, hey, let's negotiate priorities, people bristle, right? The hair on the back of our head stands up because it is this word that has a connotation when we really have the ability to shift our mindset around this topic and think about it as an effort in communicating with somebody and finding the commonality. So how do we start shifting that mindset and turning negotiation into something that just happens instead of a situation that we've got to get stressed about?
Yeah. And I do think it is getting comfortable with that word. And I think you hit on it. We all have a different relationship with it. It all evokes something from our past, whether we felt manipulated, we felt taken advantage of, or we saw that through others. Because really, at the end of the day, a negotiation is a high stakes situation. And so I like to tell people to start looking at their week or just in their regular day to day. What is high stakes to you? And what that is what evokes emotion that it feels a little difficult to you. And it could be as simple as starting a difficult conversation with somebody that you know is going to feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be very simple. You know, if my daughter, I helped her move and she promised to buy me and my boyfriend, this is a fictitious story. She volunteered to buy pizza for my boyfriend. And this was over a year ago. And she hasn't. Well, to me, going to her now, she works for a living, she makes good money, but to say, you never bought that pizza, that feels really high stakes for me.
When it's not even on her radar.
On her radar. And so to be okay with, why is this high stakes for me? What is causing that? It could be, you know, I used to work with a guy, his name was Dan, and I didn't have high trust with him. So when Dan was in a meeting with me, I didn't share as openly as I did when Dan wasn't there. So that meeting was high stakes for me because Dan was there. So just understanding that, it's not an excuse, but being able to go, this is high stakes for me. Let me unpack that a little bit for myself. Why is that?
So there's a perspective there. And we all have one. We all have a lens. We all have experiences that have colored that lens. And going into a negotiation, because that's what we think about, heightens those experiences or intensifies the lens and the perspective that we bring to it. And oftentimes it sounds like, you know, this idea of like not being able to think about the quote unquote other side, which is tricky language for what we're talking about here, but being able to put yourself in those shoes can shift things a little bit, or maybe help you back off the intensity that it feels because of your specific perspective.
Absolutely. You know, Harvard says if you take 30 seconds before you walk into a negotiation and consider the interests of the other party, you will have measurably better results. Think about that. If you're going into a meeting that you're really stressed about and you take 30 seconds to consider, to your point, flipping yourself into the chair of the other person, you create an empathetic lens a little bit more. You might pick the right words. You might start in the right place. And that it's a shift.
It almost changes the stakes in my mind because, you know, I'm envisioning, I don't know why the show Succession just popped into my head, right? The hardball aggressive, Kendall's out outside the boardroom, smacking himself and getting himself all amped up to go win a negotiation versus how can I go in here and create symbiosis instead of a mutually exclusive win-loss environment?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And they say emotion is not a good strategy because it clouds our ability to think. And when you're clouded, you focus on what you're interested in, which then inhibits your creativity. And we don't want the other person to get emotional either because we want them to be clear-headed. Because when both parties are clear-headed and they practice reciprocity and they're showing collaboration, you're more likely to continue to do that. But as soon as you focus on your own interests, as soon as you do that, guess what the other side's going to do? Focus on theirs. So
let's talk more about this. The focus on winning, avoiding uncomfortable conversations, losing. How do we, so I love this like little tip from Harvard, great little piece of advice. How do we then, okay, so there's like layers of this mindset shift. So one, reframing what a negotiation is and is not.
Yep.
I would say two, being aware and self-aware of the perspectives,
Yep.
experience, knowledge, and beliefs you're taking to that conversation. And now we get into this, how do we stop thinking about it as win-loss and start thinking about it as a conversation? What are some tips, tricks, other things in addition to this, like 30 seconds of empathy? Wouldn't we love for the whole world to have 30 seconds of empathy right now? What are some more things that we can do to neutralize the mindset going into these tough conversations?
Yeah. Well, I think identifying that it's important to you and understanding what you need to do. And I'm going to introduce, I think, an important framework. It's called PACE, and it kind of goes to what you said, and it's PACE, and it's prepare, aware, close, and evaluate. And the prepare and the evaluate are things you do on your own, and the aware and the close are you in the room. And so the key to negotiation is, if you talk to any negotiator, it's prepare. The party that's more prepared is going to have a better chance statistically of having a better outcome. So prepare is really important. And the reason that I think it's so important too is, if you have a plan that your past self, once you get in the room, prepared for you, and you think about, how am I going to frame this? How am I going to practice silence? What's important to me? What's important to them? And really prioritize like your floor and ceiling. When you go into aware, you need to be present in that moment. You can't be solutioning. You need to take that plan that your past self has created for you and really be aware of, what else does Angie need to know? Why did she ask me that question? What do I need to do to shift her mindset? She's getting emotional. What do I do to calm her down? How do I show that I want to work together and I can give her something so that she feels like we're going back and forth? So even having that framework helps you say, okay, I'm going to do this to face this high stakes situation. Is that helpful?
Absolutely, because I'll tie this back to what we've been talking about kind of since the beginning, which is, if you prepare and you are aware, that means you're preparing and aware of the 360 of the situation, and not just in your own world, which means you have prepared by being aware of what the other the other side of the table may be interested in, maybe prioritizing, preparing for various priorities they may have, and also knowing the order of your priorities, what are deal breakers, where you're willing to kind of negotiate or trade off, right?
Yeah, for sure. If you don't have a walk away, you don't have a plan. And you have to be really honest about that, because if you don't have anywhere to walk away to, you don't have options, that's bluffing. And that is not, there are Carnegie Mellon, their PhD program, they have the students negotiate in any situation they're in, whether they ask for a side with their sandwich at the deli, or they go to the grocery store and they, whatever's beyond what's advertised. And the only place they say you can't negotiate is the gas station. And it was so interesting to think about. People are negotiating all around us all the time. Some people feel more comfortable with it than not. Even that kind of idea that it's happening all the time allows you to be curious about it, ask more questions, push a little, just kind of understand this, have situational awareness of what's around you.
Shall we all now pause and give Susie a giant cookie for, I believe, unknowingly bringing up my alma mater on my podcast?
How fun is that?
How fun is that? I love it. And so here's something I was kind of going to ask, and I'm almost come to a conclusion, but I'll ask it anyway. Is negotiation a skill or a personality? I actually feel like it might be neither, but I want to hear what you think.
Wow, that is so interesting. I would say off the top of my head, more of a personality, because, and I'll tell you why. My colleague Dan was a typical sales guy, and he was really did negotiation as you would have read it in the textbook.
Yeah.
Taking
So
the
he had like
power.
a he had a natural disposition for
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Okay.
And sometimes that worked for him. But I'll tell you what, there were a few clients that asked for their accounts to be moved over. And I think that was because of the lack of connection, that lack of
Mm-hmm.
relationship. And it's more than a game. So I think that I like people to learn how to negotiate, but make it comfortable for them.
Yeah.
Not come and, wear this tacky orange suit or what, I don't know what visual, is you're that person that goes like this, that
The used car
I got a
salesman is
deal for you.
probably the easiest one to think about. But this is an interesting example because it sounds like it can be a personality, but that may not always serve because it likely means they're leaning on natural strengths and not preparation and awareness versus someone who learns a framework and kind of a skill, but figures out how to take an approach that's like genuine to them and
Yep.
in relation to the audience.
I totally agree. So it is a skill. So yes. So I could position it that way too, is
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
skill that you learn and you adopt it to make it your own, to feel comfortable for you, while allowing it to sometimes when the stakes are high, it won't become always easy, but at least you feel more confident.
And there's an important thing about this isn't, we keep talking high stakes. High stakes is in the eye of the beholder. I think the obvious thing we think about is like a big deal, negotiating a salary or a contract. But there's the underlying theme here is this idea of advocating for yourself in all your aspects of life because it's happening all the time, whether or not you're prepared and aware or not.
Yes, it totally is. And that's kind of the basis of where this came for me. Was in my corporate role, Dan asked for everything. And he would ask for the parking space. He even asked for me to report to him because I had good results and he knew that would make him look good. He asked that my team and the accounts that I owned reported it into him. He just didn't have any boundaries around it. It was fascinating. I learned a lot from him. But what I realized is when we both got new offices and they were both big and overlooked the mountains, and they were, had a conference table back in the day when offices were really important.
That was the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But Dan's was at the corner of the hall. And my executive coach said, "You got to go ask for the corner office." And I was like, "What? Didn't you understand? They just gave me an office." And what I realized was they always thought about, well, Dan will complain about this or Dan will ask for more, but Susie will just take whatever we give her. So in the meeting before the meeting, when they decided about the offices, they did math for Dan. They didn't do Susie math.
Oh, and it wasn't about Dan advocates for himself the most. It was, we don't want to hear Dan complain.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
And he just asked a lot. Like, I think there is even just increasing your quotient of asking. We have this fear of getting no, which sometimes inhibits us from asking. And what's interesting about no is it's hardly ever delivered in the best way it could be. This would be the best way. No, you can't have this, because then you're going to go, "Oh yeah, let me tell you why."
And you get closure and can evaluate.
Yes,
look at that.
Exactly. But no is usually delivered in a sneaky way. Well, not right now.
Yes.
We can't do this. So it's really sneaky, but we believe it's easy for people to say no. But research shows that it's hard for people to say no. And if you doubt that, think about how hard it is for you to say no.
We hate
no more.
I actually think it's a little bit of a problem in society right now. We hate telling people things they don't want to hear. I believe that there is a kind but direct way to do that, because otherwise, in this particular example is perfect, you end up leaving them wondering without closure or expecting the answer to change because it wasn't absolute.
Yes, it's diluted and you don't feel that good about it. And it makes people like, you should never accept the first offer. We've heard that. You should never accept. You should always ask for time. One of the reasons we don't think about is if you accept it, if you offered me double what I expected, Angie, and I go, oh my gosh, yes, of course. You're left with this feeling of, oh, I could have gotten her for less.
Uh-huh,
So when you
uh-huh.
ask for time, you're showing that you really respect the offer.
Yep.
It's a good strategy on both sides. So you're exactly right. When you dilute your position, then that makes the other person doubt you have the skills or your value is as high. And we dilute that. When you talk about advocating for yourself, how do you talk about yourself?
Yep.
How do you position? How do you frame what opportunities? I heard a woman at a leadership conference who's at the C-suite. She goes, I never realized I don't know who the right people are for these special projects, but it's easier for me if somebody's raising their hand and saying to me, I want to do this. I'm not going to give it to the silent person.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the silent person gets the lesser office because they know you're not going to say anything about it. And I think there's a difference between, well, I tell people this in the world of job searching is you ride the fine line between annoyance and persistence. And I think that is true in most areas of life where we have to advocate for ourselves. And this is where I want to bring in something you talked about earlier, which is EQ. Emotional intelligence is huge in these situations. And so how can we be better at reading the room, knowing when to push, knowing when to be the boy who cried wolf, knowing when to kind of like back down a little bit? Whether it's super, super high stakes or just an everyday, where does emotional intelligence come in and how can that help us inform how we approach things in real time?
Yeah, it's such a great question and it's always different, but I would say situational awareness is really important in thinking about that. So in your prepare, do they think that I'm going to ask for something? What is their expectation? How are they going to react? Are they going to be surprised? Are they going to be shocked? Are they going to be frustrated? All of those emotions are okay, but being prepared for those emotions that others show to us can make us retract or make us nervous or make us change our position. So preparing for what is that room going to look like? What are the politics that are going on? Do you have positional power? What is the relationship with that person? Do I need to spend time kind of connecting with them before we get into the nuts and bolts of the deal? And then once you get there, really being clear about what is your ask? What are the 3 things they say, especially women, they're so proud of themselves for getting the courage to get in the room that they're just waiting for that opportunity to exit.
I feel like that's a win. And there's nothing more beyond that sometimes.
Exactly. So even deciding, I'm going to ask 3 times, or I'm going to ask for these 3 things, and really being clear about what your plan is instead of avoiding it. And that can really help your EQ. And even in the moment, I like to consider what's going on here. How am I feeling? A low stakes situation that's just a mundane like meeting that you're in. All of a sudden, a senior person walks in and sits down. All of a sudden, low stakes goes to high stakes. So for you to go, all right, senior person just walked in. Do I say anything to him? Do I not? You make a decision about how you're going to handle that situation. And so situational awareness and giving yourself that permission to adjust to what's happening in front of you instead of just your plan. It has to be a combination of the 2.
And I think what's so great about what you just gave a great example of, I think how we can build confidence in and condition ourselves a little bit to these conversations by putting ourselves in more low stakes situations and pushing our boundary and our comfort zone when we're in those situations. Then you have a thicker skin when you're in the big room.
Yes, totally. And it could be in your day-to-day, like when have an opinion. If you usually, when you're deciding what restaurant you're going to eat at, if you usually are like, whatever you think, honey, have an opinion.
Yes.
Decide, change the course. We listen the least to the people that we know the best because we believe.
Including ourselves.
Yep. And so practicing silence interrupts that regular cadence, makes people think. Really thinking about how are you clear? Even making the choice, well, you know what? I feel like Thai food tonight. I want us to go to Thai. Like having it, to your point, those are all low stakes situations, but change the way you approach them and see what happens.
I'm going to go back to speaking to the women out there because I think that we tend to, well, I'm going to remove myself from the we, because ask me what you want to know and I will tell you. But I think in general, we tend to be more conciliatory.
Yep.
And we have opinions, we don't share them as much. And I think some of it comes from, we're going to get on a little soapbox, but we're two women, we're two power women, we can do this. We're allowed to do this. I think that part of that is also when we look at the professional world, there is like a stigma or an expectation or a double standard even in how we communicate. And if a man goes into a room and is very direct, I experienced this firsthand in my career as an engineer. If a man walked into a room and was very direct about what needed to happen on a project, everybody hopped to and was on board. If I walked in and said that, I'm a you know what with a capital B.
Yeah.
How can we embrace this idea of advocating for ourselves, being situationally aware, being emotionally intelligent as women trying to navigate some of those dynamics?
Yeah. I think there's two things. One is, and this might not be a popular answer, but it's an important answer, is even contemplating how they expect you to show up and what do they expect from you, and not to fall into that. But to your point, how am I going to finesse the way I'm going to ask them? It's important to think about their interest, their lens, and how they view you. Is there
prepare and aware?
That's right. Exactly. And the other aspect of that is your frame can be in your voice. Think about how you're going to frame or how you're going to position. And it can sound like if you wanted an opportunity that you know that is going to come up publicly, and you wanted to kind of seed the idea for somebody to think of you, think about how you're going to frame it. If you ran into them in the hallway, or if you have a few minutes before the meeting starts, how do you say and be prepared for, hey, Angie, I saw that you're expanding your team and I've always really respected you as a leader. I'm interested in pursuing that role. What do I need to do? Who do I need to talk to? And how do I put my name in the, I haven't thought about exactly how to say it, but you get what I say? Like, you don't have to become this other person, but frame it in a way that they can hear you. And you still are that person that they expect, but you're still not diluting your message.
And you're still yourself. Mm-hmm. You are adapting, or I should say relating is probably the better word, your authentic self to the audience.
Yes.
Because there's a difference between being a chameleon who shows up differently to different audiences and the same self who relates that in a way an audience can understand. There's a big difference between shape-shifting and yourself with a twist.
Yes.
And what I think you're saying is if you're prepared and aware enough of the audience, you can be yourself with that twist that's needed for it to land well in the room.
Yes. And don't forget to, we hear our own voice from our own mind. And that person hears what you're asking for from their perspective. So if they're direct and they're bold, I will also kind of take on a little bit of their persona. And especially if I don't know them that well, and be direct with them more than I feel comfortable. And I'll take that confidence from their delivery.
Yeah. Oh, so now we're getting into some of the tactical advice, which I always love getting into, because that's in a way, what you just described to me is the sales kind of tactic of mirroring, which can actually help you relate to somebody and help you ease into a conversation because you're feeding off of them, but also in a way that they kind of get. So you can lean into that as a starting point to these kinds of conversations.
Yes. Mirroring is really big, and we don't consciously think about it. I think that's why if you can think about negotiation in every day and you start spotting these things and watch how people practice silence, see how people mirror, what is the power in the room? Those are all things, once you pay attention, you can't unsee them. But mirroring
we just created some confirmation bias in a good way, in a good and leverageable for your communications skill building way.
Okay, good.
I could just see it. You're going to go to lunch with your coworkers later, and it's going to be like, oh, we're negotiating on whether we're sharing an appetizer or not.
That's right.
Who knew? right?
Yeah.
We talked about something, just touched on it earlier, that I wanna get into again from that like practical perspective. But in this whole layer of negotiation doesn't have to be win lose, but we think about it that way, and that brings up our fear of rejection or fear of confrontation. How do we address that from a tactical perspective?
Yeah. I really like to ask questions. Um, Help me understand. Uh, when we say no, sorry, I'm just trying to like think in real time about how to say this. When we hear no, we think of about like, okay, that's the answer, goodbye. And instead pushing through that and help me understand, is it a timing thing? Is there something more I need to know? Give me more context of your answer so that I can kind of solution around that. So asking questions not only gives you some insight to a bigger context of how they see the world, it can also trigger them to go, oh, that's an easy give. I never really thought about that. So asking questions
Ooh.
helps to expand. I always tell people when they're preparing to think about leverage. Leverage comes in a lot of different things: the emotions, the relationship, the deal points, how much time you have. Leverage is a lot of like flowing things. When you think about expanding that for yourself and the other side, what you're doing is you're opening up the opportunity for more curiosity. And when you think about asking more and unopening or in opening more about understanding their position, what you're doing is you're helping them problem solve. You're helping them expand their view. And if you look at it like that, you're helping them help you.
And you're adding value to yourself in real time.
Yes.
And I'm going to make a crazy connection here for a second.
Love it.
For anybody out there who has job searched or is job searching, I would attest that networking and interviewing are also negotiations. You are having a conversation around how you might be able to add value, they can add value. And same in an interview. And I love some of these tactics for interviewing. I've told people that before, like, you don't have to just answer a question. If it would help you to ask a question, you don't want to do it all the time in an interview, you're like shifty, but if it helps you to ask a question to get more insight to answer the question appropriately, you're helping yourself and showing insight and buying yourself a little thinking time. And all of that can help you with that little pause, with that little silence that helps you just go a little bit when you're in these high stakes conversations.
And I'm going to add a bonus to that. When you ask a question that makes the other person think or is unexpected to them, they think you're smart.
Yes, they do. I call those smarty pants questions for a reason, everybody. But it's totally true. It's because you showed the thoughtfulness, the insightfulness, and the curiosity to ask it, which goes a long way if you're interviewing with high-level executives and you're meeting them kind of at their level, but that's the same as being in a room where you have prepared and you're aware of your audience and you are meeting them where they're at.
Yes, that's exactly right. Right. It's all about how do you bring their story, your story, how do you bring them into the book? How do you show them the page so that, and I like to think about how do I keep reframing their mindset to understand, ooh, that's interesting. She asked me a question about this. She still doesn't understand this part of why this is so important to me. So add some more color to that. And you're shifting. I like to think about like the visualization of it in an intense situation, thinking about that space and how do you guide them to understand where you want them to go to get to close.
Because again, if we come back to the beginning of this conversation and we stop looking at this as I'm sitting across the boardroom or across the table from somebody, and one of us is going to win and one of us is going to lose.
Yeah.
And I go in with the willingness to understand them and maybe meet them where they're at, I have a higher likelihood of potentially bringing them over to me, but also now I don't have the goal of bringing them all the way to me. I know there's a middle ground where we can both win.
Yes, for sure. And you know, the research around women is that women are great as negotiators for others. So reframing that as how is this more than just about me? But the other thing is that women are great negotiators if they have clarity. where
Yep.
men tend to be able to negotiate in ambiguity. And so the clearer you can get about what that is that's important to you, the more you're going to go for it when you know what's important. And what that does is it allows you to go, oh, Angie doesn't understand that this is exactly what I want. What can I give her that's around this that's important to her?
And statistically speaking, you are 100% right. It's something like 47% of women negotiate a salary versus like, I don't know, probably 100% of men. I think it's like 85%. And it's, women tend to be harder on ourselves, on our self-worth and our value. And then we end up undercutting. And so while this, everything we're talking about is applicable to every gender, I hope you ladies in the room are listening a little bit more attentively, because we tend to fall into some of these traps we're talking about, or we stay small and stay quiet in the room because of that fear of rejection, fear of confrontation, fear of looking like the big B, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Totally. And listen, I have 3 girls, and my oldest is 30, 28, and 26. So they're all in the professional world. And I'll tell you, I'm super proud. My 26-year-old was having her annual review, and she said, Mom, help me think about what I want. And so I can have the meeting before the meeting with my boss to really signal, these are the goals I've got, and this is my expectation. Because when you go to your annual review, the decisions have already been made. So we talked about the meeting before the meeting that she'd have over their boss. And then right before her annual review, she called me and said, okay, Mom, let's talk about, if they give me less, let's talk about what is my response? If they give me exactly what I want, let's talk about what's my response? And if they give me more than I expected, what is my response? It's important to really think about, how are you going to be elated? How are you going to show your disappointment? How are you going to be like, this is great, I really appreciate this. This is what I want next. And so really I just loved that she did that, because I was like, this is brilliant.
I'm so proud of her.
I will take part credit, because she's my
You can
kid.
I'll give it to you.
But I loved that. That's such an easy, such a visceral way of saying, how do you look at negotiation, and not just accepting, especially just wait till, I was the path of least resistance. I would just work really hard and let them give me, until I learned from Dan. Why not ask in your voice for more and advocate for yourself and position and look at it that way?
Because the worst thing you're going to get is no. And today you're probably not even really going to get a hard no.
Right.
I love it.
They're going to be diluted, or you're
going to get a soft no. I had a client tell me that the other day. They're like, I asked to move to a different team and I got a soft no. And I was like, what the hell's a soft no? So I want to know, as we kind of wrap things up for this conversation, because there's like so many more I want to have. If you could wave a magic wand for everybody out there and they could wake up tomorrow with one negotiation skill, what would it be?
Oh gosh. It's like a will in my head, and it's going to stop on something, because there's like so many.
I hear the wheel of fortune wheel. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to take liberties and say, start using the idea of, is this situation high stakes for me? I need to be thoughtful about negotiating. So use it liberally. I'm going to give myself an extra.
You can have 5 if you want. Just give it to us.
Okay.
Just lay it on.
And think about how you're going to move into that situation. Like really think about your frame. How are you going to frame it to the other side? And then I'll just give you 3. I'm giving you 3 tips. And then think about the cadence. Practice silence and even awkward silence. And that unlocks, even if you just do it with intention, sometimes you have to practice it. That changes the conversation.
Knowing when to shut up is a really positive skill, a really, really productive skill. And I'll tell you, that's one thing, I think it's very fast, and to a detriment sometimes. My husband cannot get it out as fast as my head is going. And that creates some challenging negotiations. And if you can just be comfortable with 15 seconds, sometimes people just need to freaking think.
Totally.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yes.
I love this. So The self-awareness to know what's high stakes and not.
Yep.
Silence is golden.
And how you frame.
And then the framing.
Yep. Absolutely. It's the differentiator. The framing and the silence, like all three of those as a combination, lethal.
Love it. All right. So how does everybody find you and tune into all of this amazing negotiation, but bigger picture communication wisdom you have to offer? Because I love this. And this is like so usable in all aspects of life. So how do we get more?
Yeah, I'd love people to join my world, live in my world, and never see the world the same again. I have a link, negotiationlove.com. You can sign up I have a newsletter that goes out every week with just tips. It's, just kind of my life. You get a little taste of my life. And I have a podcast. You can find it there too, How to Get What You Want. And the secret answer is adopt a negotiator mindset. So I'd
look
love
at that for full circle.
Yes. I'd love for people to follow me on LinkedIn. You can start there. So just look for Susie Tomenchok on LinkedIn. There's only one.
We will drop all these links in chat. Negotiation love.
Love. Yeah. Everybody should love negotiation. Negotiationlove.com. Yeah.
Or at least not hate it. So negotiationlove.com. There's some resources there, the podcast there. Yours truly will be there very, very soon. And you can find Susie here on LinkedIn if you're watching us live. She and I are connected. And her newsletter is great. Like me, you get a little lens into Susie's life while learning about negotiations, and that makes it just more and more approachable. And so I'm so appreciative of your time and sharing all of these. There's a ton of mindset, but practical stuff here to just reframe, rethink, and approach negotiations differently. Because at the end of the day, it's a conversation, not a win-lose situation.
Love it. So it's so fun. Thank you so much for letting me be here with you.
This has been fantastic. Susie, again, thank you so much for being your authentic self and joining us today. And all of you out there who are listening, I appreciate you starting your Monday morning and your week off with us. I will see you next week for another edition of No More Monday.